Okay, we'll call this June 13th first budget kickoff session to order. Chair would like to recognize the absence of Commissioner Glanzer. She has a family issue that's going on. I know we'll all keep her in our thoughts and prayers in the upcoming days. We believe Commissioner Hersom is just running a few minutes late, but we are going to go ahead and get started with this workshop. And Mr. Manager, with that, if you will take us away, please. Folks, if you're hearing the hum at home, we're working on it, but we're just going to move on with our workshop. We'll see if we can get it fixed during the course of the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and welcome to the 2019 budget season, I guess our first public meeting related to the budget. As you know, the budget starts in January for the city of Newberry for the next fiscal year. So between January and May, staff is working on putting together personnel projections, capital budget, operating budget, and then in May, Dallas and I start compiling it, and we meet with our elected officials to get their thoughts and input as to things they might like to see us include in the budget or not include in the budget or address with our budget. And then we move into June where we start having public workshops. So tonight's workshop is an introductory workshop. It's the first of 4. Our game plan is to have an introductory workshop, and then we'll have a workshop on general fund. The third workshop will be on the enterprise funds, and then the fourth workshop will be just concluding, wrapping it all up. Of course, we'd have additional workshops if the commission or public think it's necessary. Our objectives tonight are really to kind of lay out the process, refamiliarize everybody with what our plan of action is and the things that we'll be asking the commission to consider as we go through the budget process. And as always, when we do these presentations, Dallas and I are going to split time. Dallas is feeling a little puny tonight, so as a result, I picked up an extra slide or 2. But I didn't pick up the first slide.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Commissioners. As always, we're going to give you a brief overview of the budget process and the timeline so far, what's coming down the line. The full budget calendar with all the dates, including the various trim dates and requirements, has been previously provided to you, and we'd be happy to redistribute it if you'd like. As the manager said, we began working on the budget in January, when department heads submitted their budget requests. I'll skip all that point, as he just said. There are a few action items we'd like the commission to be aware of. On July 9th, the commission will be voting on your preliminary fire assessment rate. That is the cap, the highest you can go on your fire assessment for this year. At the present time, staff is not proposing an increase in fire assessment, so I would imagine at the July 9th meeting we'll set the cap at the 175 that it currently is. However, the commission always has the option to set it higher or lower. And then on the 23rd of July, the commission will be voting on the preliminary millage rate. Again, that's the cap, the highest millage rate the commission can set without re-advertising, and that will be the millage rate that gets advertised in your trim notices. That'll go out in August to all of the property owners in the city. And then we have a couple of more workshops, as the manager said. And then in September, their first commission meeting will have the first budget hearing. The second commission meeting will have the second and final budget hearing to adopt the final budget. And then our budget, as always, starts on October 1st. And then we submit all of the truth and millage requirements to the Department of Revenue. As always, just to go over some of our budget guidelines and guiding policies, we strive to maintain at least 2.5 months of operating reserve in all of our major funds. Currently, 2.5 months in the general fund will be $1.4 million. At the end of last fiscal year, we had $1.5 million, but the commission did decide to use a portion of that fund balance to pay down the fire station debt. So our current fund balance is $1.2 million, so we're a little bit less than 1.4. However, we anticipate rebuilding those reserves this year and continuing into next year. As always, one-time revenues are used for one-time expenditures or placed into reserves. We don't continue to operate on one-time income. The budget has to be balanced in accordance to state law. The enterprise funds shall establish fair, equitable charges and fees to meet their expenses. We also strive to develop a diversified and stable revenue stream. And then when we prepare the budget, we take into account inflationary and population changes.
Well, I just want to start the budget process on a high note. The things that that this commission, this community, and this staff have accomplished in our previous budget seasons. So, first and foremost is that we, at the end of last fiscal year, had achieved a milestone of getting our general fund reserves to our target, which was $1.5 million. I think our target's 1.4, so we exceeded it. We're not currently there, but we expect to be there. Just a few short years ago, I think we were starting at zero. Maybe 3 fiscal years ago, we were at zero. So to build those types of reserves in that short of a time frame says a lot about the city of Newberry. Our commission over the last 4 years have asked us to diversify revenues, and those are a list of some of the things that we've put in place that do help us diversify our revenues and are helping us maintain a lower millage rate. This commission has asked us to increase funding for public safety, and we have done so predominantly in the fire department area, where we've invested in new infrastructure, new equipment, made an investment in our human assets, our staff. So that's an accomplishment for us. We've seen increased funding for repair and replacement of our infrastructure assets. And it's not just repair and replacement. The commission funded an expansion of the water main out on State Road 26 to expand our water utility footprint. We've developed more equitable water and wastewater rates for all of our population, so those folks in our community that use minimal amounts of water and wastewater aren't paying a higher fair share than those folks that use more considerable portions. We've maintained very competitive rates. The trend in electric rates for our customers, as we saw maybe 2 months ago, was there's been about a $14 per month decrease in the charges that the city of Newberry's residents have been paying over the last 10 years. And you know, when you see that kind of decrease, that I think it was a 14% decrease over the last 10 years. I think that in an economy and in a world where we live with price index, I think that says a lot. We lowered our solid waste rates last year by 25%. Although somewhere through the budget process, you may hear us say that we may have overshot the target a little bit, and we may have to make an adjustment there so that we balance that fund. We've continued funding for economic development, and what we will always see as a huge feather in our caps and this commission's cap is we saved our residents approximately $750,000 in last fiscal year alone by contracting for law enforcement rather than by staying in the county's law enforcement MSTU. So moving on to the types of issues that we'll be looking to direction for the commission on, and we'll expound upon those as we go through through tonight's presentation. We asked the commission to give us guidance for ways that we can diversify our revenue stream. It helps us to maintain that lower millage rate and be more competitive with our peers. And also we have determined that a blended stream of revenues, or asking taxpayers or our citizens to pay through multiple types of funding sources, tends to be more balanced than just by simply looking at one source of revenue alone. So we've been successful in that, but there are still more opportunities, and we'll explore those with you. Millage rate is a primary thing that we're looking at, particularly as it pertains to the general fund. There is a homestead exemption amendment that is kind of looming out there. It won't impact us this fiscal year, but will have an impact on the following fiscal year. So we like most other governments in Florida, are looking at ways to minimize those impacts ahead of time, doing some good planning. Law enforcement is a very large portion of our budget, so that's always something for us to consider. Personnel expenses, capital improvement program, renewal, replacement, and expansions, and then our utility rates. First of those areas, some time ago you challenged staff with what are ways that we can diversify our revenue streams, and we came up with a fairly comprehensive list. It doesn't mean we've quit looking, but generally the ways that government entities can generate revenues is a fairly known entity. So the top of the list is currently a utility tax on water sales. State legislature allows us to do that. Most municipalities do charge a water tax, and up to 10%. And for we've done the calculation for each percentage. If our commission wanted to authorize a water utility tax, it would be about $6,200 a year in annual revenue. So we could make as much as $62,000 if we charged the full 10%. Previous commissions have not elected to pursue that, but just want to make sure that you're always aware that that is an option for us. We brought forth at one point that we could obtain franchise fees through the sale of natural gas in Newberry, and there was some equity associated with that because we charged some companies a franchise fees and other companies didn't. The commission directed us to move forward on that, and we were successful. We in the last year we've developed franchise fees with 2 utility service providers, and I think just recently started receiving our first checks. They're not going to make or break our budget, but it's a beginning, and it lays the footprint for the next 100 years. There are a variety of special assessments that are available through us through home rule. Fire protection being the top of the list of the most common. We already utilize that as an assessment, but there are a variety of other ways to apply assessments. I think the last one this commission looked at seriously was stormwater, some sort of stormwater assessment, with the thought being that the revenues collected through these assessments are earmarked strictly to what they're associated with. Like our fire assessment is only spent at the fire department, and so it's an easier way of tracking and ensuring that revenues don't get diverted to some other fund. Staff's not necessarily advocating for any of these, but just making sure the commission is aware that they have those opportunities.
Just for our new commissioner's sake, at any point in time, I find it more useful to ask the question while we're on that slide than to try to go back. So, not saying you have to have a question, but don't be afraid of jumping in.
And Mr. Mayor, to that point, I'm going to back up a slide or two and ask a question. It was a Dallas slide. Where did it? Oh, it's going a different way. Dallas made a comment about one-time revenues being utilized for one-time expenditures or placed in reserves. Mm-hmm. Is there enough? Is there clarity to that? And an example would be the city sold a lease for a tower and got a one-time fee of $250,000, I believe. And this commission said, if you're going to spend that, you can spend it once, but don't spend those dollars on an annual recurring basis when you don't have an annual recurring revenue stream. So that's where that budget guideline thing came to us from.
Yeah, and I appreciate that clarification. With your permission,
Commissioner Herson.
and this will be going forward, but looking at the law enforcement category of our expenditures, do we know how much is associated with the SRO costs? Looking forward that the county school board at some point hopefully will be picking up more of that cost. Do we know what each SRO costs us in total from a salary, fringe, equipment standpoint, so we know when we start to negotiate with the sheriff what kind of bargaining position we have going forward?
We absolutely maybe know.
Can we ask for that from the sheriff to get that a definitive answer? Because I would expect that number should be known, because let me rephrase that. I would expect I would have to know that number if I'm creating a dollar amount that I'm going to bill somebody. So I would expect that we could expect that she should be able to tell us that.
The sheriff's office provides us that information in great detail.
Okay.
And we have developed a very sophisticated model to make sure that Newberry, to help ensure that Newberry is paying its fair share and it includes a variety of things. We're paying for SROs. We get funding from the School Board of Alachua County. There's a report that was created by Alachua County that says how much of an SRO is paid through general fund, that is everybody's tax dollars, and how much is paid for through the MSTU. And then 50% of the students that attend our schools live in areas that they do contribute to the MSTU. So we factor all those things in to determine what we think Newberry city government's fair share should be. And we come up with a number, and I was working with that worksheet today, so that number totaled about $758,000 for, not just for SROs, for everything. Mm-hmm. There are 4 or 5 categories in there. There's enhanced traffic services, there's combined communications center, there's school resource officers, and there is the school crossing guards. And so we factor all those things, we total them in, and we come down to dollars and cents what we think we should pay. And then we take that number and we go negotiate the best deal we can get. And so the final number that's in the contract is, the starting point was the model, but it's never the ending point.
Okay.
So there's a vague correlation there. But we transmitted just yesterday, we met with the sheriff a week and a half ago, and we transmitted to the sheriff yesterday that shows, hey, this model that we've been using now for 2 years clearly shows the fully loaded cost of an SRO, and the first deduct in there is the $18,000 that the school board contributes to each school, and that's going up to $37,000 next year. So we think there is a $19,000 back out at least. And so we met with the sheriff. She disagrees, and her position is to be candid. Her position is that the differential, because her position is that Newberry doesn't pay its fair share for SROs, that we're being subsidized by Alachua County Board of County Commissioners, and that when the school board kicks in that $19,000, they're going to back it in and back it out of what they pay her. And her position is so Newberry is due no credit. So we are working with her. We made some proposals, some suggestions to some things that we might could do within our contract that would be mutually beneficial. And so we had that meeting 2 weeks ago. I followed up with an email yesterday, and she replied immediately that she is out of town, but she'd get with us next week. But we're on it. The level of success we have is who knows?
Sure. I can't tell you that the school board members are very grateful to the amount of work that the city of Newberry has done in picking apart the numbers of what it costs, because they're using a lot of the data that our staff has generated as a launching point with their own conversations, because trying to go into ASO's budget is a very complex thing, and our staff has gone through it fairly minutely, especially with the services that we get, and we feel pretty confident about our numbers, and the school board agrees. They've been looking at our numbers, and they say Newberry's got it figured out, and so they've been utilizing a lot of the work that we've done in their own negotiations, which they feel will come to conclusion sometime in the next 4 to 5 weeks is their guess. I'd also remind that we will be having our own workshops also this summer. We haven't set those dates yet, about law enforcement in Newberry. We'll be able to talk a little bit more about this in particular, and then talk about some other options that we have.
Great. That was one of my concerns from the conversation with the sheriff the other night, was just what's the true cost of an SRO to Newberry. Certainly we should be able to have that number, and then remind her that she didn't lose that deputy. It's still
It's
sure they would like to think they're still deputy sheriffs for Alachua County.
In round numbers, it's probably $120,000 to $125,000 per SRO per year. The way that the sheriff gives us the number is it's based on that actual deputy. I mean, if she changes one SRO out for another one, the number changes. If they're more seasoned and further through their pay grade, it's a higher cost. But the average, I believe, the full cost is in the $125,000 per SRO range, and then we discount it for all the other people that are contributing to that salary to come up with what we believe is Newberry's fair share.
Excellent, thank you.
Commissioner Farnsworth.
Just clarify a couple of things for me. Did the state mandate that the school board provide resource officers at schools?
The city attorney briefed me on exactly what the state mandated, but they are in a better position to say. I don't believe that the state mandated anything of the sort. That there would be an SRO in every school. Maybe the mayor has better insights to me. I think that there was a focus and additional funding, but they didn't get so specific with who's responsible to provide what. And I believe that the school boards of the state of Florida and the sheriffs of the state of Florida disagree on their interpretation of what that state law is that was passed and adopted back in May or April.
The language is vague. I won't try to quote it, but it's certainly possible to interpret it as in it's the sheriff's responsibility, and it's also possible to interpret it as it's the school board's responsibility. There's also language that...
But it doesn't say the city's
It's not.
responsibility.
It's not. There's also language in it that says that a school resource officer shall be provided. So there's debate right now about what that word "provided" means. Does it mean that you can have one SRO that does a circuit and covers 2 or 3 schools, and that I'm providing you an SRO? He comes and checks in, or she comes and checks in once a day, but isn't on site. So some counties are interpreting it that way and saying we've already met that mandate because we have been providing SROs. Other counties are saying no, that means that there will be an SRO at that school, stationed at that school. So I think there's still, as politicians sometimes do, we say things without thinking through all the implications of the words that we selected, and so we're trying to. I think your point is that the city of Newberry is no longer in this mix, which is certainly a valid point, that it's either the school board or it is ASO's responsibility. It's no longer our responsibility. When there was no mandate, this board made the determination that we wanted a school resource officer. Now there is an interpretation that there is a mandate, which would remove the city of Newberry from this conversation.
What I'd really like to see that I haven't seen yet is who is paying for all these other resource officers in these other schools. Is the city of Alachua paying extra to have a resource officer over there?
Mr. Mayor, the resource officers in Alachua and High Springs and Gainesville are all provided by their local police department. They take the funding that is provided for the Safe Schools funding that the school board provides, which has been $18,000 to $20,000 a year per school, and they absorb the rest if there are additional costs. I mean, some of those, everybody's handled it different. Like Alachua used some reservist they took an officer off the street, a 40-hour officer off the street, and they used a reservist to fill the seat during the school year, and then when the school year was over or during Christmas break, that officer went right back to patrol. So they didn't come up with $130,000 or $125,000 per SRO. Their number's closer to $40,000 per SRO. So they took the Safe Schools money, and then they said, well, we'll eat the rest. High Springs, something similar, and Gainesville, something similar. So everybody's handling it a little bit different than one another. But I would say, I think it's fair to characterize that Gainesville, Alachua, and High Springs have absorbed some of the cost for providing SROs in the schools in their communities.
What about a school like Buholtz?
The sheriff is providing the SROs at Buholtz, and they get a portion of the funding from Safe Schools, the same allocation that we get. It was $18,000 per school last year, and the rest is made up by the Board of County Commissioners. And
Do you know how much the Board of County Commissioners actually paying?
whatever the difference between 18,000 per school is and
cost of
125,000 per officer. And Eastside has 2 officers.
And if you recall, it was largely because of Newberry's negotiations that we pointed out that a lot of schools in the county were being provided an ASO, SRO in municipalities that had their own police departments, and they weren't being charged for it. So there's some of those issues still addressed, but it highlights the fact that Newberry has been paying our share, according to us, a little bit more than our fair share for these officers, whereas other schools have been given the service without the municipality being asked necessarily to chip in.
And if we had our own police department providing those services, it'd be much cheaper than what we're getting charged from the sheriff's department, I would
I think that would be the question that we're going to try to flesh out when we have that workshop. I think when you have your own police department, you have some options to absorb those costs a little bit different ways. But that's probably a good 30-minute conversation there. So I'm not sure how much time we want to spend on it tonight. It's y'all's workshop, though. So any further questions on that? All right.
Just one other question, just trying to catch up
Commissioner
on the revenue options. On those special assessments or anything like that, are any of those at levels or being held at levels that are negatively impacting our future opportunity for revenue? Looking, I guess, you know, have we, just having come from EMO training, they talked about in some cities, some assessment levels may not be at the full level, which then prevents them from going after either state or federal funds because they've come back and said, you're not getting as much revenue generated as you already could be before you're
That's a good emu question right there.
paid attention.
Yeah.
The finance director reminds me, or advised me, that we've never encountered a situation where the state or federal government said we wouldn't fund you because we don't think you're taxing your folks appropriately.
Okay.
I think that was the gist of the question.
Yes, yeah, he worded that much better than I worded my question. I'm good.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Manager.
We are going to be, I think it's slide 9. There we are.
This is a chart that shows the millage rate comparison between ourselves, the other 8 municipalities in the county, as well as the unincorporated county. As you can see, we're in the middle of the pack. We tried to, the millage column there is the current assessed millage by each city. You can see the unincorporated is now 0 as they eliminated their unincorporated MSTU last year. The cities that have law enforcement MSTU. And then for fire assessment, because the county eliminated their fire MSTU and adopted a fire MSBU, which is similar to an assessment but not an assessment, what we attempted to do was translate what the average Newberry household pays into a millage. So in Newberry, the average household pays roughly 1.5 mils for fire assessment, but that same household in High Springs would pay 0.97 in fire assessment, or in Alachua would pay 2.9 mils in assessment for the same value household. Also worth noting on here is the city of High Springs fire assessment is currently at just under a mil. However, they have given the go-ahead on their fire assessment this year to increase it between $50 and $60 from their current rate, which will bring it much closer to our own, and therefore bring their total millage rate closer to our own as well. This just shows the same information, but in a graphic form. So again, you can see that we're at the top of the pack, but we're right in the middle. And then just the different colors are the different types of millage rates each of the cities have.
Just to, and I guess this is more for Commissioner Hersham. I think probably the other commissioners have heard it a time or two, but
And you're looking back at the other page.
yeah, back at the other page. We developed this millage rate comparison to kind of see how we stack up to everybody else, because if you don't know what the rest of the world's doing, it's kind of hard to know what is our millage rate fair. Are we getting good value for our services? And so we do our best to have an apples to apples comparison, but it's virtually impossible to do that. And I'll give an example. Gainesville's utility transfer, I did the math on it, equates to 4 mills. So it's a modest transfer. I think it's about 8% of their utility revenues. Ours is 5%, and the industry standard is probably 6%. So they're just a hair above industry average, but they have a really big utility, and so it equates to 4 mills for the average Gainesville resident. They have high level of service. They have stormwater assessments, as does Alachua County, that doesn't show up in this table, that we don't charge. They have utility surcharges and utility taxes that we don't charge as well. So at nearly every city there is a caveat. You can talk about level of service. You can say, well, let's look at all the cities that offer a similar level of service to ours. The end result to me, though, is while there is some use in trying to benchmark this as best we can, you can put a caveat or a star on every one of these cities and these columns and say, well, but you got to consider this and that. So it's take it with a grain of salt, I guess, is my recommendation on that.
Commissioner Coleman.
What did we raise the millage to cover our law enforcement? What was it?
2 mills, roughly 2
Two?
mills.
Okay.
Now, I was going to make that same point. You know, if you look at that law MSTU at 3.72, that money, that savings that we referenced in the first, that's because when we went into the books and we figured out the cost per service, we had to raise our millage by 2 in order to cover that cost per service, but it saved us the 1.72 that we would have been paying. So we would be, we'd be over Alachua if we were still in the MSTU. I always think it's most useful to sort of look at High Springs and Alachua as our 2 closest sort of sister cities for a point of comparison. So as we're in the mix of those, it's hard to compare a city like Newberry and Hawthorne with the difference in population, but sister cities kind of close in population, you can make that comparison. Commissioner Coleman, was that? Thank you, sir. Mr. Manager.
The city's preliminary gross taxable value for the current, or for fiscal year 2019, which is tax year 2018, just because we like to be confusing. But the gross taxable value is, the preliminary gross taxable value is $420 million. Again, that's preliminary. On July 1st, Mr. Coleman and his cohorts at the property appraiser will
I have to explain this every single day, so.
will provide us the certified taxable value. They provide us this number as just a base number for us to get our budget started on. We anticipate it'll increase, as always, but the $420 million is about a 7% increase from our taxable value of just under $393 million last year. It also includes about $17 million worth of additions, which are new construction, annexations, new things added to the tax roll, which does not play into your rollback rate. The Save Our Homes cap this year is 2.1%. As the Commission knows, the Save Our Homes cap applies to homesteaded properties. It states that the taxable value of your home cannot increase more than 3% or the CPI, whichever is lower. So this year's Save Our Homes cap is 2.1%. So although the value of your home may have increased from $200,000 to $220,000, it really can only increase by that 2.1%. So you're not taxed on the full increase in the valuation. Based on those numbers, the preliminary rollback rate is 5.8465. which is adjusted from the city's current millage of 5.9999. And again, all of those rates are subject to change once we have the certified values on July 1st. And then the chart at the bottom there is just for the commission's knowledge, any increase in the millage you might want to make, those are the different impacts it would have both on the city's revenue and on the average homeowner in the city of Newberry. So moving right along into doom and gloom part 2, the Florida legislature. As the commission is well aware, on November's ballot, there is a constitutional amendment, amendment number 1, which is to authorize an additional $25,000 of homestead exemption. It would require 60% of the electorate to vote yes for it. However, we anticipate that most people will vote to assess an additional tax break on themselves. The Florida League of Cities is campaigning very hard against this. Their position is that it's a tax break for residents, but it's going to shift most of the costs over to commercial and business enterprises. The impact to the city of Newberry will be about $25 million in lost taxable value in fiscal year 2020. That translates to about $150,000 in revenue annually to the city that will be lost. The way the millage rate will work that year is that it'll be included into your rollback rate. So we would anticipate that your rollback rate will be a roll-up rate the year that this takes effect, because it'll attempt to recoup those costs by shifting the fees over to non-homesteaded properties. Based on our projections, should Amendment 1 pass, we'll anticipate a loss in taxable value next year. We took our current year's values plus the increases we've been making over the last several years, projected those out, and then lessed out the loss we anticipate, and the net there is a loss, a reduction in taxable value to the city as a whole. So again, it's $150,000 annually that we would lose. We just letting the commission know that's on the horizon. It'll be something for next fiscal year's budget that'll really impact us, but we do want to start making plans for that this year.
And basically what Dallas is alluding to is we generally try to maintain a policy across the board of no major swings. You know, if you have to go up on your water rates by 1.5% a year, that's better than not going up on your water rates for 8 years and then hitting people with a 20% increase because you tried to look like the savior and say we're no increases, and then all of a sudden you realize you're running in the red, and in order to change that around, it has to be this big hit. So we recently experienced that pain about 4 years ago, where we were massively underfunded, and it was this it was a big hit. And so I think what Dallas is gently and very politically correctly alluding to is that next year we will most likely have this hit. So as we work through this budget, just know that all of our good efforts may be wiped away next year when we have to go up massively to make up for the difference in what could potentially be coming down the pipes.
Yeah, I want to make sure I understand this. So we look forward, if the voters vote to increase their homestead exemption to stay budget neutral, we will have to increase the millage rate or other sources of revenue to stay budget neutral.
Correct.
And I'll just add that when that happens, though, the shift in the budget rate will impact non-exempt properties more. So to me, this, to use the mayor's term, magnanimous gesture by the Florida legislature to give homeowners a break is actually resulting in an almost inevitable tax increase on our business enterprises in Florida. Oh, and renters, non-exempt properties.
Mr. Manager, or Dallas, if you're still up.
Just 2 more points here. In personnel, as always, we had the Florida retirement system made changes this year, as it does every year. The increases were not very large in the grand scheme of things. about 4% citywide, mostly in the fire department because they're the special risk. But we've budgeted that in the current year's budget. And then again, as health insurance always increases, so we've budgeted a worst case scenario of a 10%. But as always in the summer, we shop our health insurance, we quote it out, trying to find the best deal, not only for the city, but the best benefit for our employees. So we've plugged in a 10% increase now, and we'll have more hard numbers as the budget season progresses.
It's a bit of a challenge because we tend to work in a world of price indexing, CPI, those types of things, rate of inflation, and retirement system increases are always exceed CPI rate of inflation, and when they're 4%, which is double this year's CPI, we celebrate that we had a minimal increase in retirement. Same thing with health insurance. We think that 10 is the number, but again, that CPI, we'll try to increase our revenues by no more than the CPI. That always means that there's an offset somewhere. We're taking less than our revenues are being less than CPI in other areas to make up. So retirement and health insurance increases tend to become a bigger and bigger portion of our budget every year as a result of that.
Commissioner Coleman.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, on the FRS, are we rated as management like everybody else on our FRS, or are we?
Did we accomplish that last year?
Mr. Mayor, we 2 years ago, the commission authorized the commission to be placed into the elected officials
Right.
FRS class. We attempted to place the elected officials into the FRS class. However, the Florida legislature has closed enrollment into that class, and it would take a special act of the Florida legislature to allow the City of Newberry City Commission to be in the elected officials class. They did advise us that every 15 years-ish, they will open it, and anybody who wants to enroll their elected officials can enroll. It has been 12 years since they last did it, so they anticipate that sometime in the next 5-ish years, they may open up the elected officials class. However, they also advise that given the current political climate of the Florida legislature that is not does not like the Florida retirement system very much, they do not anticipate that the enrollment will open. They did, however, advise that if the commission would like it, they could write a letter to the legislature and to your delegation to ask them to open it. So it's a very long answer to say no. You are in regular class. Or if you work for another FRS employer in whatever class your FRS employer has you in.
Commissioner Farnsworth.
Since we use the state for our retirement program, is there any way to use the state for our insurance program?
We've never looked into it, but we certainly can.
I think that'd be
You're talking
a
about
good option.
health insurance?
Yeah.
Well, we shop it around, right? So have we been finding someone cheaper than the state's program?
We have shopped it around. We shop it around with actual carriers, Blue Cross, Aetna. We've talked to other local government entities who are in a insurance pool to see if we could join in with their pool. They've all told us no. But we've never.
We're a healthy bunch of people. Why don't they?
I wish that was true. We might have lower health insurance cost if that was true. But we've never actually asked our brokers to look into joining the state's program if that was an option, and we will certainly ask them this year to see if that's a possibility.
I mean, Commissioner Hersom runs marathons, so he brings our health factor way down. So now that he's on the board, Brett, let's try again.
Counterbalances Coleman over there.
Well, Commissioner Farnsworth, he's a professional golfer, and I'm all right. On that, I know that Crapo's office hasn't been able to tag into like the Department of Corrections and those type too. And I think they got more employees than we got here at Newberry, so it's probably, I shouldn't say a waste of time, but I don't think we'll be able to get into it.
It's a good question. That it, Commissioner Fargo? All right.
So that brings us to COLA and merit increases. Over the last 4 to 5 years, this commission has kind of established the precedent for how they would like to handle this issue. And so we're planning to program them in the budget pretty much the same way. There's a preference for merit increases. For the last couple of years, it's been up to 4%, so that people that are performing at a higher standard would see the greatest increases, and those that aren't performing, if they're just coming to work and making 8, they can get no to very little increase in their paycheck. Seems to work good with staff. The ones that really put out appreciate it, that they're not, that their efforts are worthwhile. And so that's staff's take on the direction to head with that, unless the commission directs us otherwise.
Mr. Manager, what was the average increase last year? High twos?
High twos.
That's what I thought.
I think that our target when we started that program maybe 3 years ago was right at 2.5. So I think we're still sub 3. That's what we anticipated. And also, some of the feedback we received this year is that we might be a little lacking in positions in terms of providing an adequate level of service in the city, particularly in the project manager. We what my mom would call plates bigger than our stomachs. We're not able to administer every project that we have out there with our existing staff, simply because operations load is too much, and so we find ourselves later in the fiscal year not having started projects or not able to successfully complete some projects just due to lack of time to apply towards a project. So this year we are attempting to fund a project manager position that would primarily work with facilities and public works and utilities to administer some of those capital projects, specialize in those areas. We are also looking to add one administrative support person in the areas of finance, human resources, utility billing. That's a half-time, 20-hour-a-week position that would serve as backup to utility billing and also provide administrative support in an area that currently has no administrative support. Everybody that works in that area has got a very specific job function.
Commissioner Coleman.
Mayor, and this is directed at Mike, but are we looking at increasing, or the need? I know I had brought up several months back in the utility or electric department. Are we looking to beef that staff up?
Operationals.
Operationals.
Mr. Mayor, we staffed up that area by adding an apprentice last year, and also I think our utility director tends to focus more on subcontracting certain tasks, so we don't go into heavy construction in a new subdivision. We tend to be more maintenance and maintaining equipment, and if we have a big capital project that would result in a lot of man hours, we're more likely to bid that out. You may remember that 2 to 3 months ago you awarded a contract to 2 firms that would do just that. So we went through an RFP process, identified 2 firms that were capable of doing that type of work, and so we're trying to, rather than staff up, contract more specialized work out.
Well, I'm just looking out for Jamie.
And we
Poor
appreciate
Jamie.
that. Jamie didn't request additional support in those specific areas, none of his utility areas. His number one request is for a project manager to help him do more of the administration of special projects rather than just because he spends so much time trying to deal with operations.
And I think the next slide will also speak to some of the concerns that you're getting to. Commissioner Martin?
Is there any sort of projects that we seem to kind of do on a little bit more recurring basis, or can kind of see out over the horizon that we may be doing a little bit more recurring, and almost take an RFP for some sort of a contracted retainer, much like what we do with the city attorney's office, say with a paving contractor, where we're giving them a retainer every month and kind of associating that?
We have recurring contracts for a number of different types of work that goes on in the city. We do recurring contracts for electric work, for engineering work, for paving and sidewalk work, tree trimming, pole testing. There are many routine tasks where we get unit pricing, or we piggyback with others to get unit pricing. Like our pole testing, we're piggybacking off a contract with FMPA. So those types of things that take a lot of man hours, very specialized effort, we try to subcontract those things out. It's very difficult to subcontract out when a fuse is going to blow because of a squirrel on a tree. And in the past, when we were undertaking large capital projects with our electric crews, we ended up with frustrated developers. We'd show up at a new subdivision, we'd start plowing in conductor, thunderstorm pops, and there goes our guys, and they don't get back for 2 days because they're dealing with whatever mess came through. And that became, and then they got tickets and work orders for turn-ons and turn-offs, and so our ability to stay on task is really difficult for that. So it tends to be my philosophy, as well as Jamie's philosophy, that large-scale projects, we're not staffed for it. We're staffed for maintenance, for dealing with, kind of like the fire department. If a fuse blows, we need somebody available to go deal with it. Dealing with the day-to-day customer, keeping the lights on type of things. And if it's a big project, an example would be the State Road 26 extension project. There was no chance that we were going to build that with our staff. The utility project behind Bellagio's, same way. The State Road 45 Force Main project, all way higher magnitude that we could handle with our crews. So we've bid those out, and we'll continue to look for those opportunities. We see the securing of the prison inmate squads as kind of a hybrid. We've not staffed up by bringing those crews on. By our math, we get about, I think it was 3.5 to 4 times the man hours for the unit cost of one with ours. It comes with some heartache, but we spend about $60,000 a year for a crew, and we get I think 7.5 man-hour equivalents or manpower equivalents out of that crew, and so we've got one funded for this year, but they haven't hit the ground yet. The state has been really slow in getting that crew to us, and so it's hard to see what the benefit of that crew is in terms of reducing Jamie's workload, Public Works workload, because they just haven't hit the ground. And a 10-person crew, when that first one came through, made a noticeable difference in about a month. The whole community said, "Wow, we think the second crew is going to have an equal impact," and we're dying to find out just how big that impact would be.
Mr. Martin, did you have a follow-up? No. Commissioner Farnsworth?
Just curious, has any positions been eliminated over the last year?
Yes, sir. Whenever we exited the Diamond Sports contract, we eliminated one of our Parks and Recreation programmer positions. There was that's all. Oh, and that Dallas reminds me that a second recreation programmer was eliminated in this fiscal year as well. So that's be 2 recreation programmers in the last 2 fiscal years.
Okay, Mr. Manager. Let's do this next slide, and then we'll take a break for public comment. I think we've already kind of got into this slide, right?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, certainly touched on it. Fiscal year 18 was the current fiscal year we're in, provided a few service level increases for the first time in a couple of years. The commission may remember you added a building official in your building department. You continued your ED funding, as well as increased public works funding for sidewalks and maintenance of different items, as well as the paramedic training funding you provided in the fire department to train our firefighters to become paramedics, as well as increased funding in our facilities department to maintain the city-owned facilities. In the current year proposed budget, there's several increases in your operating accounts. There's a couple of special projects that are one-time projects that are occurring. One of them is the charter review project. Another is an LDR, land development regulations update, that's in your planning department. There are a couple of increases in your recurring operations expenses. Most notably is going to be because we're no longer contracted with Diamond Sports Park, there are costs that were associated with Diamond Sports Park that need to be moved into the general fund. The biggest one of those is going to be the inmate crew. Diamond Sports Park paid for about half of the inmate crew, the new inmate crew. So that cost is coming over to the city, as well as just some other costs that are being pulled over. So all in all, there's a larger increase in your operating recurring expenses this year than there have been in years past.
Commission have any questions on that slide? All right, we have a couple members of the public here. I'd like to take a chance if anybody, before we get too far away, if anybody has a question, we'll entertain those now. Seeing none, we will continue on. Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just our going through our capital improvement program, not with specificity, but kind of our approach to it. We generally overall classify projects in two different categories. It's either renewal and replacement of existing infrastructure or expansion and enhancement. For the last several years, there's been a much larger focus on renewal and replacement of existing infrastructure. Primarily, I attribute that to the commission's feel that our existing taxpayers need to be getting their money's worth, and that they need to make sure that the assets that we have are well maintained. And then if we have opportunities to expand our infrastructure and acquire new customers or things of that nature, then we'll use additional funding in that area. So so we break it into those two major areas, and then we identify every type of asset that we own, dealing from utility infrastructure. When you see our 5-year CIP, you'll see that they're categorized by fund, and then within those funds, you'll see a lot of programs. Road resurfacing program, sidewalk construction program, air conditioner replacement program, replace a roof on buildings program. We're very program oriented to make sure that we don't fall too far behind on anything, that we try to stay current with our infrastructure. There's been a renewed emphasis in the last 3 years on facilities, and there's a list in there. We've established a VERF, which is a, tell me again, something replacement fund. Vehicle and Equipment Replacement Fund. I'm not as big of an acronym guy as other people in the city, so we have a VERF, but that has proven to be very beneficial, and I really appreciate that. That was on the commission's wish list maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and we have very adept staff in the finance department, and lo and behold, from one budget meeting to the next, we had a VERF and we were up and running. We've had a commitment to maintaining our computer workstations and IT equipment, and created recurring funding sources for Parks and Recreation. So the expansion projects are they're also identified, but we try to utilize different funding sources. I give you an example. We would fund R&R projects, renewal and replacement projects in our utility systems out of a depreciation account, and we would fund expansion of utility infrastructure out of development fees, and they're earmarked for those types of projects. So we try to make sure we account for money in different accounts, so to speak, and make sure it gets funded in the appropriate, expended in the appropriate area. And in subsequent meetings, and when our next meeting, you'll be seeing the 5-year CIP for general fund, and then when we get moved to the enterprise fund, you'll see the 5-year CIP for the enterprise funds. And as part of the final approval, our entire 5-year CIP is adopted as part of our budget, so it runs with us. It's a element that's required by the state of Florida. In our comprehensive plan, we have to have a 5-year CIP. So you'll see an ordinance coming through amending our comprehensive plan to update our 5-year CIP. And that truly is, I hear a lot of times we talk about fluid documents. It does not get put on the shelf. It is not the same document from year to year. I think it doesn't change by more than 10 to 20% on an annual basis because we've been through it a number of times. But each year, as we go through, we learn that certain projects are no longer warranted. Certain projects get completed, but things change. And so what looked like it was going to be a project 3 years ago just won't be a project. And during the year, we've learned of another need. And I'll give you an example. On this upcoming CIP, you're going to see utility R&R for Northwest First Avenue when it becomes part of the state road network. If they're in there tearing up the road, that's our chance to jump in there and make sure that our water system, our wastewater system, and our electric system are up to snuff. It'll be the least expensive time we can do it. That wasn't in last year's CIP because we weren't anticipating that project, but we're going to want to start planning for when that happens. So that's the type of fluidity you see in that document, but we find it to be a very valuable tool at the staff level, and I would just tell you candidly, I'm proud of it. It's not something you see in cities of our size to the level of detail that we have that frequently.
I would just echo, the programs that are on this slide. I know you've been watching this process, Commissioner Herson, from the other side, but these are hallmark programs that this commission has worked very painfully over the past 4 years to implement. They're sources of pride for the city of Newberry as we go around to other municipalities and they ask you, how do you do that in Newberry? The answer is probably on this slide right here, and it's a program that gets started and funded a little bit every year, and then you just don't back away from it. You keep it going, and 4 years later, you're seeing the fruits of the labor, the the VERF program. I think this commission is going to see the rewards of that program probably this year substantially, and it's because of the foresight of this commission years ago to do that. So the managers should be proud of it, you guys should be proud of it, and all the employees should be proud of what we've been able to accomplish here, because it does make us a source of envy for a lot of other municipalities. It's good, responsible government.
So moving to, if there are no more questions.
Commissioner Farnsworth.
Yeah, please.
One of the things I'm concerned about is part of the possibility of the acquisition of Canterbury, and I'm wondering how would that fall into the scheme of things and the budget process.
Well, it's not in our current CIP, and typically we think that an acquisition of something that large would result in us needing to borrow money. At least that staff's recommendation is that we borrow a portion of it if it's of any magnitude in approaching $1 million or more. It would require a budget amendment. So if we get halfway through this fiscal year, if it's not in the budget when we start the fiscal year, if we get halfway through the fiscal year and it looks like an acquisition like that's going to happen, we'll come to you with a budget amendment and a finance plan. This is how we propose to fund the whole thing. And if you approve this plan, then please approve this budget amendment that goes behind it. You've seen something similar when we replaced the SCADA system. It's been 1.5 years ago that we started that project. It was a planned project, but it was planned for a future year. And so when we realized that there is no continuing to make this thing work, and we came to the commission and said, hey, we need to spend $500,000 to replace this thing, and we're going to have to do it in this year's fiscal year's budget. You approved it, we gave you a finance plan, and then Dallas brought forth a budget amendment that incorporated it. So we have our antennas up that is coming down the pipes, but without more concrete information. Our preference is to move this budget forward without anticipation of that, but have a contingency plan. If it comes, we'll develop the finance plan and we'll make a budget amendment for you to consider.
Has there been any kind of talks or negotiations or anything with the owner of the property?
Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
The conversation at this point, I think, is too new. There hasn't been a conversation with the property owner. This just got introduced at the joint meeting. There's been a conversation at the manager level, from city manager to county manager, but at this point, there is no solid number for any piece of the conversation. So it's a conversation at this point, but I'm not sure it's a conversation that we could in any way plan for, because until we get some of those numbers down, there's nothing. We don't even know if you guys want to do the project until you have the number. And the numbers that are being thrown around right now are vastly disparate. They're all over the place. So you guys authorize staff at the joint meeting to begin those conversations. I think our two staffs have had one preliminary talk, which is, I think, way too early for us to even be concerned about planning for it at this point, because we got to get to the point of, do we want to do it first? But I would imagine that we'll be able to have some of those numbers for you in probably 4 to 6 weeks.
Are you talking about in conjunction with the county?
The conversations are too new to even answer that question definitively at this point. There's some interest on the county's part. There's another interest from an equestrian conservation part, but nobody is willing to say how much money they have, and we can't get a number from the property yet. So we're working on all those things, but right now it's a concept, it's an idea, but I think we're on the 5-yard line with someone throwing that idea out there, and you guys won't be able to start making an educated decision until we get a little closer to the 50.
Well, I know the county's already budgeted massive amount for acquisition of a new facility, and I would hope that we would be ahead of them and acquire it before they do.
Well, they are not going to acquire it by themselves. They've already said that if they want Newberry's buy-in. So we're driving the ship right now.
And most recent conversation with the county manager was today, and I anticipate our staffs are working to set up a meeting for next Friday, where we can sit down and talk in a greater level of detail about the possibilities and what it would take. But the county has not given any indication that they would even consider acquisition of Canterbury if it wasn't some sort of a joint project with Newberry.
Okay, well,
And
my position is that if we can do it without the county's assistance, I would prefer to do it that way.
well, the county, the county commissioners have said they're not going to do anything until Newberry comes to them. So Newberry has to come to them. So the first thing we're going to do is send Mike to talk to them. But appraisals have to be received. There's, like I said, we're at the 5-yard line with this thing. It's an interesting idea, but our staff has to do a tremendous amount of work before we can have an intelligent conversation about it, because it's just too many unknowns. Mr. Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And if there are no questions about our capital improvement program, then we'll come back to a familiar slide, which is just the reminder of what the list of things that we'll be seeking direction from the City Commission as we go through the remainder of the budget process.
And again, some more familiar slides, but just to remind the commission that at your July 9th meeting, you're going to be voting on the preliminary fire assessment. We'll then have a second budget workshop, which will be focused on your governmental funds on July 11th. And then at the July 23rd meeting, the commission will vote to set the preliminary millage rate, which once again is the cap that you cannot go above without re-noticing all the property owners in the city. It's the same slide over again. And with that, if the commission has any questions or comments or direction for staff, we are
would you like to go back to the commission considerations and see if anyone has a consideration that you'd like to make a comment on? At this point, Commissioner Hersom, we've got a long budget session in front of us. So ideas you have, thoughts you have, you can just kind of throw them out there, and we can all simmer on them and work through them. As I think we have 4 budget workshops, so it's not like anything that's said here tonight or thought here tonight is permanent. Staff probably has some ideas about some of these things, so if there's one that you say you'd like to hear their thoughts, or we can open the floor to the dais for comments. All right. Commissioner Martin.
You said that the homestead exemption is increases potentially is a voted on item this year, but won't have a budgetary impact until the following year, right? Okay. The whole idea of the Save Your Homes changing the value of the house, a lot of that is, and Commissioner Coleman probably better answer that. That's part of the reason why when you look at your tax roll, the value of your home that you would perceive to be in the marketplace is different than what is actually on the tax roll. Am I fairly correct on that?
Speaking to the mic there.
I was eating my sweet tarts. Can you repeat that?
I have people ask me why the market value of a home is not necessarily reflected in the taxable roll. When you look at your tax bill online and it has 20, 10, 11, and it doesn't necessarily always. Can you explain that a little bit? Is that part of why?
It's a pop quiz.
Yeah.
He's an agricultural property appraiser.
I can try and answer the question if you'd like me, Mr.
Go ahead, and I'll go back to my sweet tarts.
Mr. Mayor, and again, Mr. Coleman, jump in if at any time I veer off course. My understanding is that the valuation system that the property appraiser uses is a different valuation system than the actual property values in the real estate market. The real estate market is obviously more based on supply and demand and location and all those good things, and the property appraiser system is not as much. When you look at your tax bill, you should see on your tax bill your taxable value and your deferred value. Your deferred value is the amount that's accumulated over the years in your Save Our Homes. So typically your accumulated value is a fairly good amount, especially if you've been in your home for many years. So if you ever want to know how much you're actually saving in your taxes, if you look at that deferred value and then multiply it by your tax rate, you'll see how much you're saving annually. And then of course, another portion of it is that the taxable value is always a year behind. So the taxes that you pay in November are based on January 1st of that year's valuation. So you typically have a whole year of inflation that also is lagging behind in your appraisals.
Okay.
Okay, I can handle it from here now. Okay, now I'm kind of done with these. It's based on 6 different strata systems that we use, strata 1 through strata 6, and we do when you're dealing with a bank appraiser, it's based on comparable sales, which they use anywhere from 3 to 5 now. Some of them 6 are comparable sales, which is nothing like what ours is, because ours is considered a mass appraisal. So you're looking at an area. I mean, some areas are what we call neighborhoods. So it can encompass 2 or 3 section townships and ranges. So that's where we're at. And so so if whoever's asking you this, it has we don't do anything like what a bank appraiser does, and that's why. And that's also the reason why the value is lower than when you got a bank appraisal.
Okay.
Well, and Tim, just from what I gathered from training this weekend too, it also deals with the appraiser as just a straight, what is the stuff? Whereas the resale value would be, you know, you have improvements in from an appliance standpoint, flooring standpoint, things like that, where the appraiser or county appraiser just takes a straight cost on some of that.
Okay,
Yeah, we don't go inside your house.
right, okay. Looking at the current millage versus the rollback,
Page 11.
page 11. My thoughts on that, I guess the difference is about 0.15, which is a little over, what is that, a tenth plus another,
It's 160,000.
and that's going to translate to the average homeowner is going to, if we went back to the rollback rate, that's probably maybe 20 bucks. Difference?
It is $21. If we
$21.
kept the 5.999, it would be
If we went back,
$21 a
okay.
year. Yes. Some good on the fly math there.
Can you,
So that's a neat, I'm sorry.
can you restate, because I think that's a good point to make for everybody, to make sure that we understand that. Just restate that point.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. The point I believe Commissioner Martin is making is that if the city were to keep a millage rate at the same rate that we currently have, of 5.9999, the average homeowner would pay $21 a year more in taxes to the city at the same millage rate.
Right.
And it generates the city an additional $60,000.
Okay. Because I know already, I've had or read a couple of comments about people. We've kind of touted the fact that our values have gone up 9%, and I've already gotten, oh, well, that means my taxes are going up. This kind of speaks a little bit to that. I think the page 13, new positions as far as the project manager and administrative support. When we get into what our actual numbers are, I'll kind of make a little bit more definitive decision about whether to support that. Going back to slide 14 on operating, as far as the prison crew goes, we've gotten out of the Diamond Sports Park game. I understand that some of the admin expenses are going to come back to the city on a whole because we can't distribute those. But are there some there's got to be some variable expenses there that we no longer have to worry about at all, right? So those are going to roll off. Okay.
Yes, sir.
For the most part, I'm kind of in favor of just kind of maintaining what we've been maintaining and making a little incremental adjustments. I, like the mayor said, don't like to see big swings one way or the other. I've always touted the whole idea of value. I think people will pay more in taxes if they feel there's a valuable there, but the opposite's also true. I continue to maintain that position. And I think that was about it, other than, did you say we're anticipating a couple of changes as far as rates on water and electric?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, the commission in the past has authorized a CPI adjustment for water and wastewater rates. We anticipate that we'll bring forward a CPI adjustment on water and wastewater. And then the electric department, which hasn't had a rate increase in 8 years, we anticipate a 1 or 2 cent increase on the electric rate.
Okay. I wasn't necessarily prepared to answer a question about other ideas on diversification, but were there already some things that you guys were thinking about that are not necessarily on here yet?
No, sir. We're kind of fresh out of new ideas. I think we'll present the old ones that haven't been utilized without necessarily an expectation or even advocating that we should. We just want to make sure the commission is aware of the options that are available to them, and we'll, if at some point there's a desire by the commission to explore some, that's exactly what we would do. We'd begin to explore them and show you what the revenue impacts may be, the benefits to doing something like that. And but until then, these are the list of things that we're aware of.
Okay.
Commissioner Coleman?
Mr. Mayor, was there a lot of equipment that we got from Diamond that was out there that was stored? I mean, that's now come back, maybe going to different departments, or?
Mr. Mayor, there was enough mowing equipment that came back that we have a mower replacement program that would result in the acquisition of a new mower or two every year. We evaluated our current fleet, and staff has recommended that we not acquire those two mowers for at least this year.
Cool.
And we'll reevaluate next year, and if we seem to have a pretty healthy fleet of mowers at the moment, but we use them. We work them real hard this time of year, so we'll continue. And if next year we think we don't need to replace them again, I couldn't imagine us going past 2 years, but we definitely are recommending against this year and possibly next year.
Other thoughts? I think anytime you're staying sub 6, you're in a pretty good spot. Okay. Staff have anything left?
No, sir, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Do we have any public comment on our preliminary budgetary workshop? Hearing none. Final thoughts? We are adjourned.